In all of our travels through the scriptures and in all of our journeys with Jesus, few stories carry such familiarity as the Good Samaritan. I don't think most people even remember who the Samaritans actually were, but they know this story of the person who stopped to help someone when other people, in this case the priest and the Levite, couldn't be bothered. This is a story about compassion. It's a story about paying attention to those around you who might need help. It's a story about going out of our way to do the right thing, even for a stranger. Heck, we've even codified this in our own culture with the Good Samaritan Law that protects people who might intervene in the midst of an emergency or crisis. As long as your names aren't Jerry, Elaine, George, or Kramer, chances are good you'll stop and help a person if you can, and it won't endanger if it doesn't endanger your own safety and well-being. And thanks to the Good Samaritan Law, you probably won't go to jail for it if you don't have one of those 4 names. And if you have no idea who these people are, ask someone who is chuckling or talk to me later. But anyway, all of these stories about the Good Samaritan, things like compassion and paying attention, these are things that are all worthy to speak about in a sermon. I've done that many a time, and while not exactly earth-shattering, they're important lessons for us to take away always. Help where you can. Help when you can. Pay attention. The trouble is, these messages are a bit of a watered-down interpretation of the Good Samaritan story that Jesus preached to his first listeners. Those gathered around Jesus would have been absolutely scandalized by what he was suggesting they do in this story. This would have been a topsy-turvy idea for them. But why, you might ask? Who were the Samaritans anyway? To answer this question requires a bit of context, so we're going to take a very, very quick trip. This is the day trip, or like an hour tour on our travels this summer into the history of the nation of Israel. So buckle up, I'm going to speed us through this so I don't lose you all completely. Okay, if we remember way back to our Sunday school days, we probably learned a bit about Jacob and how he had 12 sons, the most famous of them being Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Okay, Jacob's 12 children, and then the grandchildren, in ways that I'm not going into today, they formed the 12 tribes of Israel. Fast forward about 1,000 years, and there are 2 kingdoms made up of these people. The kingdom of Israel was also referred to as the Northern Kingdom, and it comprised 10 of the 12 original tribes. The other 2 tribes were located in the southern kingdom of Judah. So we have these 2 kingdoms, right? Israel and Judah. The northern kingdom, Israel, the kingdom of Israel was destroyed by the Neo-Assyrian Empire around 720 BCE. This led to the massive deportation of thousands of Jews into the region of Mesopotamia. If you've ever heard of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, that's what this is what is being referred to. So through some other treaties and political alliances, the southern kingdom held out in this time frame, but eventually was laid waste by the Babylonian Empire around 597 BCE. So this is the beginning of a roughly 70-year time of exile for the Judeans, the southern kingdom. If you remember Daniel in the lion's den, right, where he is thrown into this den for worshiping only God and not King Nebuchadnezzar, that was this time period, with the southern kingdom, 70 years of exile. Now, a time of exile is a really humbling time for any community, especially one which firmly believes that God has given them a particularly holy piece of land on which to live and to worship, a place where God's very being is believed to live. Very humbling time. So this is where we cycle back to the question, what is a Samaritan? When did these folks come into existence? So when the kingdom of Israel fell, the 10 lost tribes, some people stayed behind in that time. And during that conquest, other groups were placed on those lands And the Samaritans emerged from this section of history. They were a milieu of people with Israelite roots and blood who engaged in Jewish beliefs and practices, but with one key difference. As people understandably firmly rooted in their own land, they were the ones who stayed, who stuck it out, who were there. The Samaritans believe Mount Gerizim, the place Moses and the Israelites first worshipped God, to be the dwelling place of God, as opposed to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So the Samaritans were the ones, or they were the descendants of the ones who stayed through all of these exiles. They have been faithful to their heritage and to the land that they believe God has given them. Samaritan, the word, is actually from the Hebrew root shamarim, which is translated as guardians or keepers of the Torah. Okay, so that's the Samaritans. These are the guardians. Think Guardians of the Galaxy, right? They're hanging on to all this stuff. They have stayed. They are doing what they are called to do. Maybe different from Guardians of the Galaxy in that way, but okay. All right, so I'm pausing the history lesson for a quick question. That might seem a little tangential, but it'll all connect. What are you all most excited to see when you return home after having been away? What are you all most excited to see?
My cat.
A cat? The cats? I hear lots of cats. Mine too. The dog.
My bed.
Bed. My bed. You're sleeping in your own bed, right? Yeah. Anything else?
The door.
The door. Yeah. Just going inside to home, right? That sense of, even if you've had a great time away, the ducks, even if you've had a good time away, seeing all these things that mean home to us, right? Okay, yeah. So our bed, our familiar foods, our loved ones, our pets, this is a comforting feeling. And we enjoy these things so much more when we see them after having been away for a while, right? Now imagine if you return home expecting these things to be there for you. But you go in and you find that they are all completely gone. The house is empty. The pets are not there. Your bed has been taken away. Perhaps even the house is gone. And not only that, but a neighbor of yours has taken these things and is now claiming that they are theirs, that you are not going to get them back ever. That's preposterous, right? And that would be a terrible, terrible feeling. Remember those two tribes of Judah? They returned after 70 years of exile in Babylon, and they returned with a special appreciation and a deep love for the land God has given them, for the religious practices that they are now able to remember and engage in without being thrown into lions' dens. Except now, there are these so-called guardians of their beloved Torah. There are people who believe that they are right and they know the law better than the Jews because they have stayed in the place that they believe is holy. So now they claim to have cornered the market of God's holy presence on this other mountain. So of course the Judeans are angry about this. And from the Samaritans' perspective, the folks who have stuck around, they've been the keepers of the law, while these Judeans have been away in pagan lands, doing God knows what, for decades. Certainly they aren't to be trusted either. Can you see the tension here? This goes over about as well as you might expect, with centuries of animosity on both sides, well before Jesus enters the picture with this story of the Good Samaritan. And so when a lawyer, of all people, lawyers were more accurately known by then, at the time, as being scholars of the Jewish law, when a lawyer or a scholar of the law asks, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus sees an opportunity. It's an opportunity to really show his fellow Judeans how topsy-turvy, how scandalous his vision is for the world. Who is our neighbor? While the law scholar was trying his best to test this backwater teacher, the joke is really on him. Jesus tests the lawyer by telling him a story. As we heard a few minutes ago, a story can kind of get through to our hearts, I think, a little more than even the facts can sometimes. So Jesus tells a story. As the story unfolds, can't you just see this scholar, shamefaced, sinking lower and lower into his chair, looking down at the ground, as Jesus is telling him about what loving your neighbor can really look like. And then when he is asked, which of these three people was a neighbor to the man in need, can't you just sort of hear the man mumble, the one who showed him mercy? The lawyer can't even use the word Samaritan when answering Jesus. Isn't that interesting? It sticks in his throat. He can't believe it. He cannot even say it, that a Samaritan, of all people, could be the one who upholds the law more than a priest or a Levite. If his desire to show his vast knowledge of the law to Jesus, in his desire to do this was not exactly what he had in mind. It's too topsy-turvy. This scholar cannot call the spiteful Samaritan, the guardian of the law, by name and claim him as neighbor. And of course, this is the question to us today. Could we? Who is a Samaritan? Who is a Samaritan for us? This is what I meant when I named before that the keep an eye out for others is a well-meaning but somewhat watered-down message for this story. The Good Samaritan isn't about seeing others and caring for them. It's about taking a really, really close look inside of us and recognizing whose names stick in our throat when we claim them as neighbor. Who is a Samaritan for you? Who is it impossible for you to think of as a neighbor? And I'm not asking this question rhetorically this morning. I'm going to ask us to take a minute and turn to a person sitting close to you and share, who is it hard for you to see as a neighbor? We'll take a minute to do this and then come back together and share. All right, believe it or not, that was a minute. It goes so quickly, doesn't it? Try planning sermons. Okay, so is anyone brave enough or has a clear enough answer to share who is it hard for you to name as neighbor? Yeah. Oh. I thought I was kidding.
Wow.
I know that there's this somebody in my neighborhood who was in the golf cart parade who had a huge Trump flag. And somebody who lives in Shelton and has a handmade wooden sign that says Black Lives Don't Matter.
Wow.
That's just two. I got a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
That was courageous, Trish.
Yeah, I guess kind of piggybacking a little on that. So I had said, I'm always up for listening to people who come at an issue and see it very different ways, but it's when someone engages in that issue with just name calling or insults and things like that, and you feel like there's no way you can even listen to one another. And so I have to still remind myself, this person is still my neighbor, even if this is, they're going low on this one.
Yeah, thanks for that. When I was a hospital chaplain, I remember one of my mentors, I was pushing back on something, and she just kind of stopped the conversation. And I asked why she had done that, and she said, Jill, you are just not teachable in this moment about this issue. And that has stuck with me so many times. This person is not teachable in this moment, or am I, right? One more sharing, maybe?
My roommate from nursing school, I didn't know this for a long time until all this happened over the last 6-8 years. Her response to the election the last time was, I would go to my grave believing that Trump won that election. This is the roommate I worked with for 3 years.
Thank you. It's always shocking when it's someone who didn't close by. Thanks, guys. I mean, this is hard stuff, right? This is not simple. And that's why we're talking about things like Topsy's Turvy Church this summer and our journey through that. It's why Jesus brings it to us too. Who is a Samaritan? As we journey through life together, who are we inclined to pass by on the road? Who do we not want to see, let alone interact with, let alone help? But actually in this story, the Samaritan is the one who gives help. Who are we afraid of receiving help from? Who do we think is unteachable in that moment, who might actually be trying to teach us something about ourselves? If we ever need help on the road, if we're ever the ones left for dead, who do we accept help from? Could we even trust? Fill in the blank. As we continue on the journey of discovery, may we continue to ask these questions of ourselves, and as Jesus did, work to draw that circle of kindness and compassion just a little bit bigger, both for the giving of compassion and for the receiving it. In the name of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit.